The next paper I'm testing is Stonehenge Aqua, US made by Legion Paper. It's got a subtle cold press texture and it's very bright. I'm expecting a high degree of luminescence. It's been made, Stonehenge has been around since 71, 72, and I think the Stonehenge Aqua cold press has been made since the 90s. The mill was originally making paper for printmaking, and I think screen printers still like this Stonehenge Aqua. I'm using the New Zealand Silver Eye once again as a test study. It should show off bleeds and blends well. Using a sketch I've already made for my other swatch samples, just tracing it through in my light box. I can say that this paper feels very, very pleasant to work with a pencil on. I think colour penciled artists are going to love this stock, and it may be very suitable for mixed media as well, watercolor, gouache, colour pencil. Just laying out a loose outline, and I'm using a little bit of liquid Frisket masking fluid and dropping in the very wet wash. The first thing I notice is that the paint pulls a little bit on the surface. It's not as quickly absorbed as in some of these heavier stocks. This is going to be a great feature for some artists. Others are not going to like it as much. It does take wet on wet charging extremely well. It stays pliable and moist far longer than ash, for example, and it bleeds very nicely. It's not quite as intuitive, I guess, to mix colour to colour. I think there's a slight tendency for brush strokes to stay as you lay them. Again, that's the feature of many artists' work. They're going to enjoy this feature. Those little blooms I popped over the rock took quite nicely, although I'm not getting quite the cauliflower definition I often prefer. Once it's dry, the blooms were a little bit better defined. It's in glazing, I can see that it's very hard for a paper to have both good lifting and good glazing properties. This is a paper with fantastic lifting properties. You can rework, reactivate colours easily. You can lift colours back nearly to the paper with working. But that, a little bit like the Aquarelle, can be a stumbling block if you're glazing. You can see the paints tend to reactivate under the new coat. So if you're going to be doing a lot of glazing, this may not be the paper for you. If you're going to be doing a lot of lifting and you want bright, intense colours, I think this is going to be an almost perfect stock. Again, working colours back into previously laid paint goes very controllably. Like most heavier stocks, paint will fade a bit as it dries, so you need to put on quite a heavy amount of pigment to get strong colours to stay. Again, I'm not paying too much attention to detail. It's just a techniques test rather than an actual bird study. But I think this paper actually has some scope. Again, for the way that I paint, it's less likely to be one of my favourites, but I can see it appealing to a lot of artists that have different styles. I think wet on wet artists are going to enjoy this paper a lot, because it does stay, paint does stay wet longer than on ash, and ash has a pretty reasonable drying time. It holds detail quite well, and again, when I'm charging colour back into these ripples, I very much like the fluidity of how that charging settles. touch up this glaze, but it is tending to muddy just a little bit. Again, not all papers are made for glazing, and this is clearly more of a vibrant wet on wet stock. I think it would be perfect for multimedia, watercolor and gouache, watercolor and coloured pencils. And there you have the finished painting. All in all, it has some challenges, but an excellent paper overall.